Today's reading is taken from Proverbs 5. Please note that today's session is for adults. My son, pay attention to my wisdom. Listen well to my words of insight, that you may maintain discretion, and your lips may preserve knowledge. For the lips of an adulteress drip honey, and her speech is smoother than oil. But in the end she is bitter as gall, sharp as a double-edged sword. Her feet go down to death, her steps lead straight to the grave. She gives no thought to the ways of life. Her paths are crooked, but she knows it not. Now then, my sons, listen to me. Do not turn aside from what I say. Keep to a path far from her. Do not go near the door of her house, lest you give her your best strength to others, and your years to one who is cruel. Lest strangers feast on your wealth, and your toil enrich another man's house. At the end of your life you will groan. When your flesh and body are spent, you will say, "How I hated discipline! How my heart spurned correction! I would not obey my teachers or listen to my instructors. I have come to the brink of utter ruin in the midst of the whole assembly. Drink water from your own cistern, running water from your own well. Should your springs overflow in the streets, your streams of water in the public squares? Let them be yours alone, never to be shared with strangers. May your fountain be blessed, and you rejoice in the wife of your youth. A loving doe, a graceful deer, may her breast satisfy you always. May you ever be captivated by her love. Why be captivated, my son, by an adulteress? Why embrace the bosom of another man's wife? For a man's ways are in full view of the Lord, and he examines all his paths. The evil deeds of a wicked man ensnare him. The cords of his sin hold him fast. He will die for lack of discipline, led astray by his own folly. Here ends the reading.
So about 5 years ago, I was preparing to move from the middle of the USA to here, where I'm now, in London, where I currently reside. And I was going to get on a plane, and I could only take 3 items with me, 3 large items, so like 2 suitcases. And the third thing I knew was going to be a guitar, because guitars are basically part of my identity. I've been playing them since I was 13 or 14 years old. And love them. And so the question is, which guitar was I going to take? Now, my father had given me this amazing gift some 14 years prior, which was a Martin guitar. Lovely instrument. I played it. I loved it. But it also, I had cracked this guitar through different incidences out in the sun, and then somebody actually sat on it and hurt it a bit. And so it had this crack, and the crack was growing. And so I took it in to a shop to get it repaired. But when I went to that shop, the owner was hoping that I was going to buy a new one. So he started to be sniffy about it. "Oh, this is not a great guitar. I don't think it's worth fixing. Look, there's a whole bunch of new ones right over there. Why don't you go check them out?" And I did. I started to look at new guitars. Oh, my guitar is not doing well. It's not a very good model anymore. Oh, look at these new, shiny, beautiful guitars that we have here. I really want one of these. And so eventually I was pining away at these guitars and getting a new and flashy model, and I told my father this. "Oh, Dad, I love your guitar, but it's got a crack in the middle. I don't know if we're going to take it to Europe." And my dad, I'll never forget this, he looked me right in the eye and he said, "Son, that guitar is worth far more than you are aware. That guitar is worth far more. Go get it fixed. It's a guitar for life." And so I ended up paying a fair amount. I took it to a pro shop. It actually sold, there were about 500 guitars that they were selling at the shop. It was the biggest in the area. And I spent the money, and on the day that I went to go pick up my guitar, the technician who worked on the guitar came out and said, "Oh, you're the one who brought this guitar in. It was such a privilege to work on such a fine instrument." And so I said, "What?" And they said, "Oh, listen, this guitar that you have here sounds better than any other model we're selling in the store. This is a wonderful, wonderful instrument." And that story illustrates the principle that we're thinking about this morning. The occasion is a warning on adultery, but it can go much bigger than that. This is telling us a lot about how we deal with things that we desire so badly, but then it turns out we have something already, and the something that we already have is not only good enough, it's wonderfully valuable. And so we're told, don't pine for what's not yours. Embrace and enjoy God's provision in your life. Don't pine for what's not yours. Enjoy and embrace God's provision in your life. So I want us to imagine God saying to us this morning, He's saying to us, listen, I need to tell you, things are not what they appear here. Avoid what's not yours. Embrace what I've given you. Now choose wisely, because you must choose one or the other. Choose wisely. So let's unpack that a bit. Don't pine for what is not yours. Embrace God's provision. And specifically, God is going to tell us first, things are not what they appear here. And so we're going to pick up in verse 1 of chapter 5. In the blue Bibles, this is page 638. Chapter 5, verse 1. My son, pay attention to my wisdom. Turn your ear to my words of insight, that you may maintain discretion, and your lips may preserve knowledge. For the lips of an adulterous woman drip honey, and her speech is smoother than oil. But in the end, she is bitter gall, sharp as a double-edged sword. Her feet go down to death. Her steps lead straight to the grave. She gives no thought to the way of life. Her paths wander aimlessly, but she does not know it. So the first thing that we're told is that there is this incredibly intense desire towards this woman, that her lips drip. And he said just previously, he says, let your lips preserve knowledge. And so the way out is this lips of knowledge, right? Preserving knowledge, and then it'll keep you from the lips of the adulterer. And so the idea is, if you're on the right path, it naturally protects you from going in the wrong direction. And it naturally protects you. You're busy going the right way, and so you don't want to divert on tangent. And so when I was a young man, there were a few small incidences where I could have messed up, and there were women who came along to offer me that possibility. And the way that I ended up getting out of that, actually, funny enough, is that I would just start talking about Jesus and how much Jesus loves us, how He's looking after us, and He cares about us, and it would just pour water on that fire. Okay, it would just be out cold. And so the Father says there is this incredible temptation, this deceiving temptation. It's like dripping honey. It's smooth as oil. I mean, who doesn't want that? And then He says, but actually, it's like drinking poison. It's like playing with knives. It leads to an open grave. It leads to death. And basically, this is a straightforward warning to our society. And society is saying, don't listen to that, right? And there are people here who would say, oh, Tim, don't be one of those people who says you should not engage in premarital sex. You should not play the field. You shouldn't do those things. Don't be one of those people. Well, the Bible is doing it. And you see, to be honest, God is warning us because this is for our benefit. He doesn't want to see us hurt. He doesn't want to see us in trouble. I wish that someone had told me more frankly when I was a young man, because, I therefore didn't hear it and entered my own marriage with baggage that I wish I didn't have. And you can ask a fair amount of adults and they'll tell you likewise. This sin leads to death. You can't blame God for only wanting to help. Now, society says, go to the harlot, go to the adulterer, enjoy the honey lips. But temptation glows at first and burns you later. And perhaps you've gotten a firework, you've gotten the sparkler, the sparklers are great, aren't they? And yet somehow we all manage to forget that the sparkler is going to eventually, right? We see the light at the beginning, we enjoy it, but eventually it burns down and it burns our hands. But society, if we were to look at it, marriage is on the fritz right now. Only half of people get married, but the half that don't get married, many of them are still active in relationships. They don't get married till the late 40s, and they're often playing the field before that. In the marriage, only half are faithful. And then most tellingly, 95% of young men, probably even higher, and 50% of women, they engage in online visual adultery. They engage in pornography. It's absolutely rampant. So we're an adulterous generation. And we're being told, please don't continue that way. It leads to death. It won't help you. Now, that's against our inclination. That's against what we think is going to lead to life. And so we're going to need to understand that we need faith in order to move forward. We're going to have to take God's word on this one. Now, some of you might be feeling fairly guilty because you're already in that lifestyle. Maybe you didn't have any other statement other than go this direction, and you're knee deep in this, you're chest high in this, and how do I turn away now? Well, here's the thing. I don't want us to hear the condemnation here. We need to take the grace, and the grace is this is where things are at. We may have made some mistakes, we may have not known better, but this is the way it does. It goes down to the grave, and so at this moment I turn and I want to have a new beginning. And so I'm hoping for a lot of new beginnings this very morning. Don't pine for what's not yours. Embrace God's provision for your life. Things aren't as they appear. Temptation for what is not ours is dangerous. We need to take two specific actions. One, we've got to avoid what's not ours. And we see this in verse 7. Now then, my sons, listen to me. Do not turn aside from what I say. Keep to the path far from her. Do not go near the door of her house, lest you lose your honor to others and your dignity to one who is cruel. Lest strangers feast on your wealth and your toil enrich the house of another. At the end of your life you will groan when your flesh and body are spent. You will say, how I hated discipline, how my heart spurned correction. I would not obey my teachers, to turn my ear to my instructors. And I was soon in serious trouble in the assembly of God's people. So, a great way to avoid sin is to make sure the object of sin is nowhere near you. And so we talked last week about the idea of, if you have a problem with eating jam donuts, like I have that problem. I eat too many jam donuts. How do I get the jam donuts? Well, I go on an off day when we're not doing grocery shopping, and I just go into the store to see what's on offer, and then I have the donuts. Well, here's a great idea. Don't walk that way. Don't walk by the door of the store. Don't choose to go shopping on a day when you're not supposed to be getting groceries. Stay away. And so, yes, we need to most run in our hearts from what is bad, but we also need to sometimes physically run from what is bad. Some of us need to choose to charge our phones earlier in the evening. Some of us need to not be on our computers late at night. Some of us need to keep our computers in a communal place where everyone can see what it is that we're choosing to look at. Some of us may need to cut off a relationship that is turning into more than a friendship, and we already have a more than a friendship in our life. We're married. I remember I was getting ready to, I was starting university, and I met in this big group, and there was this young lady who was on her way to getting married. She was a fiance. And anyway, we were in this big group, and we had a wonderful time talking. And so we agreed to keep doing this for lunch. And so the next time we met, there were less people, and she was still there. And then less people, and then less people. And then eventually it was just her and I meeting for lunch. And this happened for weeks and weeks and weeks and weeks and weeks, until finally I felt a little weird about it. And so I mentioned it to my father, and he said, "You must not go to have lunch with that lady. Stay away from her. Cut off the relationship." And that's exactly what I needed to do. Because the danger is it costs so much. She's cruel, or he's cruel, whoever you are trusting in and going after. It's pricey. There's public shame. The family is shamed. The children are scarred. And then there's physical death. That's what would happen. In this picture, there's physical death, because in that society, the Lord has said, "I don't want that. And if you do that, it's going to end your life." Well, that's not necessarily for the whole world, but that was a picture of God's holiness. And so here, this young man is at the end of his life because of this sin. And the metaphor here is a picture of a plant that is just withered. I don't know if you have sunstroke. If you get sunstroke, you just suddenly lose all your strength, all your vitality. And see, this sort of thing, when we pine for what is not ours, it takes all of our vigor, it takes all of our vitality, and it sucks it up, and then we can't give ourselves to the things that we are meant to give ourselves to. It takes the best years of your life away. And listen to the regret. He says, "Oh, I groan, and I did not listen. I did not listen to my teachers." And that's the bottom line for their life. Now, some people, that's going to be the bottom line for their whole life. They're going to be in eternity without God, and they're going to groan and say, "Oh, I didn't listen to my teacher." But all of this is being told so that we will stay far, far away from what would pull us under. But we don't just need to avoid what's not ours. We need to embrace what God has given us. Verse 15. "Drink water from your own cistern, running water from your own well. Should your springs overflow in the streets? Your streams of water in the public squares? Let them be yours alone. Never be shared with strangers. May your fountain be blessed, and may you rejoice in the wife of your youth. A loving doe and a graceful deer, may her breast satisfy you always. May you ever be intoxicated with her love. Why, my son, be intoxicated with another man's wife? Why embrace the bosom of a wayward woman?" So one of the great ways that we stop doing what we are pining for, we stop pining for what is evil, we stop going that direction, is we replace it with something better. And so it's not enough to simply resist. That's kind of like saying, I have to have an iron will, but we're thirsty. That's the imagery here. We're thirsty, and we need something else to replace our thirst with. Don't drink that. That's poison. Do drink this. That's life-giving. And so we don't live in a desert, but in a desert, every day you needed to drink water. And so we have this picture of the cistern. Okay, and the cistern would be an enclosed space underground where the water is kept. And it's fresh, and it's good, and it's flowing, and it's a spring. And I don't want anybody to be embarrassed by that language. You know, God is calling our spouses cisterns. That's kind of lame, right? Well, actually, this flowing water, this spring of flowing water, it's a term that God uses to describe himself. Okay, Jesus says, "I am the living water," or the flowing water. It's the very same thing. So Jesus says, "That's me." But what God is saying here is that sexuality is good. Just use it right. Just use it right. Keep your hands off of every woman. Keep your hands on your wife, right? Keep your hands off every spouse, everyone else's spouse. Keep your hands on your own spouse. God says, "Quench your thirst with what I've given you." And here it says, you don't let the rivers out into the street. Don't just go look for satisfaction from any and every person. That's like getting your water from a river in the street, which would get all muddy and it would not be drinkable. But what it does say is it gives us several commands. We're not to love the foreigner. Rather, we're to love our wife or our husband with all of our hearts. And so we have these commands. It says, be blessed. Let your wife be blessed. Your fountain. Rejoice in the spouse of your youth. And it says, let her breast satisfy you. And that's not the terribly greatest translation. It's like, be satisfied with her lovemaking. It's actually referring to that act of lovemaking. And so, spouses, take note. This is a command here. Regular, frequent lovemaking. And so some of you guys have gotten off base here. You know, it's just fallen by the wayside. And it's time to put it back on the agenda. Well, just don't make it something that you have to do. You need to rekindle the flame, be a romantic, woo your spouse again. But this is something that is to be regular and something that you tremendously enjoy. In illustration, consider a fire. You know, a fire anywhere in the house except for your furnace, your fireplace, is dangerous. But inside, it's great, and you want it to burn hot as it can get. And so you keep stirring it up. That's what God says. And here it says, be intoxicated with her love, your spouse's love. And that word there, it could be better translated, abandon yourself, be drunk on, go astray with your spouse. So the idea is, don't go astray with the wayward person, go astray with your spouse. Be over the top, embarrass yourself, be a bit naughty. Don't be embarrassed or reserved here. This isn't a place for being prudish. And so God calls us, and he's summarizing. He's saying, embrace fully what I have given you. It is a good thing I've given you. Resist, but find an alternative. And now this idea is inherent in not just fighting off lust, but fighting anything that is wicked and evil. You're going to have to replace it with a good promise of God. Now finally, God says, listen, you have a choice. It's one way or it's the other. And so let's see this in verse 20. Why, my son, be intoxicated with another man's wife? Why embrace the bosom of a wayward woman? For your ways are in full view of the Lord. He examined all your paths. The evil deeds of the wicked ensnare them. The cords of their sins will hold them fast. For lack of discipline they will die, led astray by their own great folly. And so you get this idea of choice, don't you? You can either embrace your wife, you can either go astray with your wife, or you can go astray with the foreigner, embrace the foreigner. You can't have both. And this works out. If you chase after something that is wicked, that's what you get. And if you chase after something that is good, that's what you get. But you don't get both. A little bit of this and a little bit of that. It doesn't work that way. Why doesn't it work that way? Because God doesn't allow it. God thwarts that process. He's taking notes. And when he sees that your heart isn't committed, he catches you in that sin. And so you must choose to do what is right. So that's our message. Don't pine for what's not yours. Embrace God's provision for your life. I'm looking forward to talking more about how we might apply what we've learned in the breakout session. But let's just start with two ideas. Number one, this morning, chances are, is going to be, for many people, a new beginning. I don't want you to feel condemned if you've gone down a path that isn't good. But I do want you to say, this path isn't good. And if you do find yourself there, the important thing that you can hear is that there's new beginnings for you. And to take it. Just call a spade and go in the right direction. Part two. For those of us who the big issue is not adultery here, okay? That's not the issue for us. The question is, what are we pining for that we shouldn't have, and what can we replace it with that God wants us to have? Let's pray.